So I want to start by saying thank you, everyone, for coming. What we're trying to do here is put together a series of webinars for the Asia Pacific region, and we want to start with some more of our more popular topics, and in particular, using Onshape alongside your current CAD system. So today we're going to focus not so much on the CAD tools in Onshape, but all the ways that you can use Onshape as a collaboration tool, as a cloud backup tool, all the ways that you can use Onshape alongside an existing CAD system. So for those out there that have experience or are using other CAD systems, there are a lot of use cases for Onshape that don't necessarily have to do with building models, using it as a tool for many other reasons. So we've tried to put together a webinar just kind of highlighting the various ways that you can use Onshape alongside an existing CAD system. As I always say with these webinars, I really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. There's a questions dialog in your GoToWebinar panel. Feel free to type in any questions, and I'll do my best from time to time to stop and address any questions. I also have some help on the webinar, so again, feel free to type in anything as we're going along. So, without further ado, let's dig in. Now, there are a few things I'd like to mention about Onshape in general, but before we get into the topic of the day, and one of the first, and it very much ties into what we're talking about here today, is everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. Onshape runs on any platform, including mobile devices, so Android, iOS, your phone, your tablet, and any operating system, Windows, Linux, Mac, and even Chromebook. So you really do have accessibility from everywhere. It also ties into the topic of the day because we're using Onshape as a collaborative tool. We're working together in a cloud-based system. So again, our goal with Onshape was to bring everyone together, working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. Now, the other thing I like to point out about Onshape in general is we do consider ourselves professional 3D CAD. And when you think of professional 3D CAD, it's really three pieces. You have parts, assemblies, and of course, drawings. And we do have all three major pieces. Some things that are really unique is you'll see these capabilities really accelerate. You're going to see new functionality being added roughly every 3 weeks. So unlike a traditional CAD system where you have to wait sometimes months to years for new functionality, with Onshape, we're constantly updating. You're going to see new functionality being added roughly every 3 weeks. And the neat thing about it is from an end user perspective, you don't have to do anything. Refresh the browser and new capabilities will be there. So there's no downloads, no installs, no updates. Now, some other things I'd like to highlight is with Onshape, we have built-in version control. And this is very important for the topic of today because we don't have to have a separate data management system to manage our files. There is no files in Onshape. And we can manage versions within the document. And this is a neat capability because, again, in a traditional CAD system, that often involves PDM system with a separate software, separate management application. It's oftentimes very expensive. The idea behind Onshape was we wanted to have version control built into the core. Now, also very much tied into the topic of the day is the ability to read and write common CAD formats. So, we can import and export a lot of the standard industry formats, things like STEP, IGES, and Parasolid, and also native formats, things like SolidWorks, Inventor, Creo. So a number of different formats are supported for both import and export, and it means that Onshape is a great tool for working alongside your existing CAD system like we're talking about here today. So if you haven't tried importing documents yet or exporting documents yet, I definitely recommend it. It's one of the great ways that you can use Onshape alongside an existing CAD system. And the last thing I want to mention is, and we're going to show this later today as well, entirely new methods of collaboration. So with Onshape, we've introduced new methods that allow you to collaborate in real time, communicate via comments in real time, and even see each other's screen in real time. And so we've tried to take that workflow of sending emails back and forth with screenshots and files and try and replace it with something that's a little bit more efficient. So entirely new methods of collaboration. And these are just some things I like to highlight about Onshape in general before we get into the topic of the day. So what are we going to talk about here today? Well, a big part of working alongside an existing CAD program is how we handle importing and exporting. How do we work with a number of different formats? How do we handle exporting to other formats that we may need? And I want to walk through all the formats that we import and export. I also want to walk through a few examples of using Onshape alongside your existing CAD program. So there are a lot of examples I could show you. What we've tried to do is pare down 4 of the most common examples of using Onshape alongside an existing CAD program. So probably, what most users or many users out there would use it for. Now, as I always say with these webinars, I really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. There's a questions dialog. Feel free to type in anything, and I'll do my best to stop and address them from time to time. If I don't get to your questions, stick around. I'll make sure to answer all of them before I end things today. So that's the agenda. Now, I have a few more slides than normal in this, but I think, for the information we're providing, it's useful. And one of the first things I want to go through are the formats that we can import and export. So just keep in mind, this list is always growing. We're constantly adding new formats to this. But as of today, these are the formats that we can import and export as in terms of parts. Okay, so we have parts, assemblies, and of course drawings. This is our list for parts. So if we look at the import list for parts, we can import Parasolid, ACES, Step and IGES, Inventor, CATIA, SolidWorks, Creo, JT, and Rhino formats. In terms of export, we can export Parasolid, ACES, Step and IGES, SolidWorks, STL, and Rhino. Now again, this is the list of parts. I'm going to walk you through how to import in just a bit. But then, of course, we have assemblies. And the assembly list is, of course, a bit shorter. But in terms of importing, we have Parasolid, ACES, Step and IGES, SolidWorks Pack and Go. And there's an asterisk next to that. I'm going to explain in just a second. JT and Rhino files. So those are the formats that we can import for assemblies. And we can export assemblies to Parasolid, Step, STL, and Rhino. So that is assemblies. The last one on my list for the formats that we can import is, of course, drawings. And really, it's pretty simple. We can import DXF and DWGs. So if you have a library of 2D CAD data, we can import that data. And you can even edit those DXF and DWGs inside of Onshape. And we can also export DXF and DWG. In addition to DXF and DWG, many users often want to export their drawings as PDF, and we could do that as well. I'm going to go through an example of how to do these things in just a bit, but I wanted to show the list for those users out there that may be working with one of these formats. Now, I mentioned before, there is a caveat to SolidWorks Pack and Go, and it's a commonly asked question. I have this huge SolidWorks assembly, how do I get it into Onshape? And the key thing that you want to keep in mind when you're exporting your SolidWorks assembly is in SolidWorks, there's a Pack and Go function. And what it does is it creates a single zip file with all parts and the assembly. So you'll see in Pack and Go the Save to Zip File option. A tip for this is make sure that the zip file name matches the top level assembly name. And this allows us to translate it automatically and so on. This is the default setting, so as long as you don't change the name, you should be fine. But just a tip, make sure that the Pack and Go zip file, the zip file that you create, matches the top level assembly in SolidWorks. And I'm going to go over importing a SolidWorks Pack and Go zip file in just a bit, but just for those SolidWorks users out there that are trying to bring in their SolidWorks assemblies. All right, so let's get into what we're going to talk about here today. Now, as I mentioned before, I tried to highlight 4 examples that I think are the most common. And again, these are just 4 examples. Many users out there will have many more examples of where they can use Onshape alongside their CAD system, but I just want to try and highlight a few. And one of the first is using Onshape as a simple cloud storage tool. There are many users out there using Google Drive or Dropbox to simply back up their CAD data. And it's a great tool for that, but Onshape allows you a lot more flexibility and a lot more capability as a simple cloud storage tool. Remember, in Onshape, you can upload and store any format. So even non-CAD data, text files, spreadsheets, PDFs can all be imported into a document. And the neat thing about them is many of these formats can actually be rendered right inside of the browser. So you don't have to do anything special. You don't have to download it to view it. You simply click on the tab and your PDF you can see inside the browser. So many of the formats can be rendered right in the browser. Think of images, videos, PDFs, text files, for example. All examples of things that we can see right inside of our Onshape documents. And so I think for many users out there, this can replace Dropbox and Google Drive because it has a lot more capability. Google Drive and Dropbox, they have the ability to back up and store the data, but you don't have the ability to view it. You don't have the ability to take measurements. You can't export to another format. So there's lots of limitations when we're talking about cloud storage and storing CAD data. Now, one of the first things I want to point out is just simply how to import. And so let's jump over to the documents page here. And what I'd like to do is import a Parasolid. And I mentioned before, Parasolid is one of the formats. It's one of the more common standard neutral formats that are out there. And importing it is very, very easy. When in the documents page, you have the import document files command icon here in the top left. You simply click import and browse to the file you'd like to import. As I mentioned before, you can import anything into a document. So it doesn't have to be a CAD file. It can be miscellaneous project related files. But we're going to start with a Parasolid. Now in my case, I have this fan blower assembly, and this is actually an assembly Parasolid that I want to import. So I simply browse to it, I hit open. I get the import options. Very important when you're importing an assembly, you have the option to import with the Y-axis up. And this is very common in many other traditional CAD systems that are out there. And then also you have the ability to import the assembly to a single part studio. Very useful if you're trying to build relationships with parts because it brings everything together in a single part studio. In my case, I'm not going to check either of those. I just click import, and then the file is imported into Onshape. So that's really all it takes to back up your CAD data. Now that CAD data is in the cloud, and I can always go back and download it at a future point. So it's very easy for me to back up my CAD data to Onshape, and then even go into the document itself and view that data. So unlike a Google Drive or a Dropbox where, I do have the cloud storage aspect, you don't have the ability to view, right? So here's that actual fan blower assembly translated into Onshape. So I can see the fan blower assembly, I can see all the parts, I have the feature list, I can even make simple changes to this. And again, these are all things that you wouldn't get with something like a typical cloud storage tool. Now, there are other elements of this that I want to point out, but the one big thing that I want to stress here is, again, an Onshape document can store your CAD data from another system, but it can also store other project-related files. So example I'd like to give is maybe a PDF, a text file, a spreadsheet, all these miscellaneous pieces that are project-related, you'd want to store together in a document. Now, a tip is you can import anything, as I mentioned before, and you can do that by clicking the Create tab and then choosing Import. Right? Then I can browse to the file I'd like to import. Now, in my case, you'll see a Word doc, a text file, a spreadsheet, a PDF. So I have all these miscellaneous project-related files, and I want to store them all together. I can Shift Select, then Open, and it will import all 4 of those files at once. And remember, you can Shift Select, so you can import as many files at a time as you would like. So it's very easy to select a whole series of files and import them all at once. The thing I'd like to point out is notice that the tabs were created at the bottom in the interface. So here's the text file. And I can actually see the actual text file. It's rendering right inside the browser. I don't need to download this and view it. I can click on the PDF, for example, and here's the PDF. All right. So you can store, again, anything as a tab in your document. Now, all these project-related files are great, but the neat thing about this is not only do we get the ability to import and store this for cloud storage purposes, but we can also version control this. And we can version control not just the Parasolid or the models that I've imported, but also the miscellaneous project-related files. So I can version control the text files, the PDF files, and so on. Just click Create Version, click Create, and now I've created a snapshot of this entire document. I can come back to any one of these and update them with changed text files. And I can view this version at some point in the future. So it allows me to not just store the data, but also track major milestones in my design by, again, updating the document in Onshape and having that latest version. So that's versions. The main thing I want to point out with that is, again, you have these capabilities to not just render the model and measure the model and even edit the model inside of Onshape, but version control the model and the miscellaneous project-related data. Now, a question that often comes up was, what about exporting? If I update, or if I decide, okay, I want to upload everything to the cloud source, I want to store it here, but now I need to be able to download it at some point in the future. You can right-click any one of these tabs and choose Download. So if I wanted to download this Parasol that I originally imported, let's say I come back 6 months later, and I want to download the original file. My hard drive crashed, and I need to get this file back. Just right-click and download, and that will download it to your local machine. So again, we're just using it really as a cloud storage tool, but again, you get all the benefits that you would get with something like a Google Drive or a Dropbox. So that's the ability to download. Just simply right-click a tab. Now, another question that often comes up was, well, what about exporting? I need to be able to take these parts that I've modeled and export them as a step file, for example. And you can do that too by right-clicking a tab and choosing Export. So again, same as download, right-click, and you'll have this option to export. Now, I've already listed all the formats, so I'm not going to get into too great a detail on that, but you get to choose. And I'm going to go over in a second, this is really big when we talk about working with vendors or working with other collaborators that may not be using the same thing I am or may require a format very specific, and it allows them to choose the format that they want. So again, exporting, very simple. Just right-click a tab, choose Export. Now, in terms of cloud management, that's really all there is to it. You simply import the document, and it's stored. All the data is stored inside that one document. You can version control it. You can download it in the future. You can even rotate the model, measure, and so on, and you can export that data at a future point. So again, Onshape as a cloud storage tool, I think, offers a lot of advantages over something like a Dropbox or Google Drive. You get all these great capabilities, and again, your data is secure in the cloud. So that's one of my first examples. Real simple one. Real quickly, a few questions that have popped up. Are you able to use Onshape offline in case you need to work in an area where internet isn't immediately available? And the answer is no. We do not have the ability to use Onshape offline. If you do not have a consistent internet connection, Onshape may not be the solution for you as of today. And we think that that's a problem that's slowly going away. Internet is becoming more and more pervasive throughout the world. But again, if you have a considerable amount of time spent without an internet connection, Onshape may not be the solution for you right now. Another question, are you able to render in Onshape? And the answer is yes, with the Onshape App Store. Onshape has a number of apps. Many of them, or not many of them, but a few of them are render apps. And in fact, some of them even run inside the browser, just like Onshape. So there's a number of Onshape apps. I definitely recommend checking those out. All right, so that's Onshape as a cloud storage tool. Probably the simplest example I can give you. It's just simply backing up your data to a document. Now, the next example I like to give is using Onshape to collaborate with vendors. And this is really key when we start talking about working with machine shops, or I'm outsourcing work, for instance, and how do I communicate my CAD data to those vendors? And oftentimes it involves sending emails back and forth and screenshots and all these tedious workflows just to work with, my vendor. And so we think Onshape in this case can really provide a big benefit. And the reason I say this is because you can share very easily. And the user you're sharing with, the person you're sharing with, whether it's a vendor or not, is able to download or able to view your model without downloading anything. They don't have to download or install anything. They simply click a link, and they don't need any special tools. It also allows you to do direct editing. As I mentioned before, you can edit models that are imported into Onshape. We have direct editing tools to allow you to make those last-minute changes. So if I'm working with a vendor and they decide this whole diameter is wrong, I don't have to go back to my existing CAD application and change it. I can use the direct editing tools on Onshape, make a simple change, and move on. So direct editing tools allow you to make any last-minute changes. Great for working with vendors. And the last thing I want to mention is export capabilities allow the vendor to export in their own format, in the format that they need. Oftentimes, this is done with a series of emails. Can you send me it in this format? And then you send it to them, and they say, no, I need it in this format. So oftentimes, it's this back and forth to get the right format. If I've shared with my vendor, they can export to whatever format they need and anytime they need it. So it's a great way for working with those vendors. Now, this next example I want to walk you through is importing a pack and go zip file. So I've shown you how to import a Parasolid, very simple. And really a pack and go zip file is no different. You select import document files and you browse to the file. Now this file is called Come Along and it's a zip file. And as I mentioned before, with SolidWorks, we want to make sure to save the pack and go as a zip file and then import that into Onshape. Also make sure that the zip file name matches the top level assembly name. Right? Once that's done, you simply open and import. Okay? So the key things to keep in mind with the zip files, it will first, of course, import the zip file, but then it translates it. And in the case of SolidWorks, it will recognize things like subassemblies, and it will recognize the hierarchy of your assembly automatically. So it's a really neat capability that allows it to detect various pieces of your assembly. But once you've imported it, it's just a matter of left-clicking to open it. Another thing I like to point out about this is you have the ability to very easily look at all the various pieces. So here's one of the handles. Here's the entire come-along assembly, for example. And I can view this. I can even make changes to it, which we're going to show you in just a second. And it's very easy to do. So here's the entire come-along assembly. This came straight from SolidWorks. This is a SolidWorks pack and go. And it even has subassemblies. So here's the handle subassembly, for example. And it's very easy for me to bounce back and forth between the various pieces. But what about working with vendors? Let's say, for instance, this is my SolidWorks pack and go, and I've imported into Onshape. Now I'm ready to share it with my machine shop. How do I do that? And with Onshape, we tried to make this process very simple. There's a share icon in the top right corner. You simply click share and you enter their email address. Even if they don't have an Onshape account, we create one on the fly for them. So they don't have to have already heard of Onshape. We'll send them an email, they click a link, and they're in the document. So it's very easy for an end user to do. Now, even if, let's say, for instance, I wanted to share the document with someone, but I don't want them to have to create an account. We also have the option to share with a link. There's an option here to make a viewable link, and you can send that link to anyone. Even if they've never heard of Onshape, they click a link and they're looking at the model. So it's a very powerful tool. Even if you have no intentions of ever using Onshape, it's a great way to share your models. So when I jump back to individuals here, I've shared this. I click share, and they get real-time access to the document. Right? So the moment that person clicks the link, I get a visual cue. They don't need to download or install anything, and you'll see a little icon indicating that they're in my document. So again, real-time collaboration. I'm seeing things update live, and it's very neat from an end-user perspective because we can chat together, we can comment together, and so on. Okay? So in terms of sharing, it's very easy. You click share, you enter their email address, and you're good to go. They click a link, and they're looking at your model. Now, what about the direct editing capabilities and the ability to export and so on? So I wanted to point out some of the tools that we have here available to us. Let's say, for example, that I needed to change the eye of these plates, and the diameter is a little bit too small. I don't want to go back to SolidWorks, for example, just to change a whole diameter. When it's a simple change, I can make that change inside of Onshape and never have to go back to my existing CAD system. A tip, however, is when you import an assembly like this, it imports it in the orientation it was modeled. And if you model the parts all in individual spaces, they often end up with a single relationship to the origin. So when you first import it, it looks like parts are overlapping, and they are, but it's very easy for me to right-click and say hide the other parts. And now I filter down to just the one part that I want to edit. Now, there's some neat things I want to point out. One of the first is that we do also import the surfaces that come along with it. So if you're worried about the surface data being imported, those come along as well. But now let's make some simple changes. I mentioned before we do have a series of direct editing tools. So for instance, if I wanted to make this hole just a bit bigger, I could select Move Face, select the face that I want to offset. We'll select these two faces. We'll set these to offset, and then enter my offset value. Okay. So very easy for me to make, for instance, to make these holes a 1/4 inch bigger. Green check OK, and now I've made that change. And again, I don't have to do it in my existing CAD system. I don't have to go back to SolidWorks, for example, make the change, and then go back and import the changes into Onshape. Just make a simple tweak inside of the Onshape interface using the direct editing tools, and you're good to go. Now, I mentioned before, we have the ability to export to a number of different formats. So, for instance, if I were doing a water jet operation, maybe I've shared this with a vendor and they're ready to cut this on a water jet. I could right-click a face, and then I can choose the option to export as DXF. So again, if I'm working with vendors, very common format for laser cutter, water jet, whatever the operation may be, but I choose export as DXF, and it exports that face as a DXF. So again, export's very easy. The other thing that I like to point out is just a frequently asked question is, what about STL? What if I'm printing this, and I've shared this with a vendor who's going to print it? You can right-click a part and choose Export, and then choose the STL option. Okay, so that's also how you can get STLs out, for example. So again, simple direct editing tools. You can make a few changes to the model very easily. Let me show you one more example of that. So what I'd like to do here is change this grip. And let's say, for example, I've shared this with the mold maker, and they've told me, what, we have an issue where, this pocket depth that you see in the grip is too deep, and we need to make a simple change. This is another example where, again, I don't have to go back to my existing CAD application. I can use something like Move Face, select the face, do a translate along this edge, and then just grab and drag. And so now I'm changing that pocket depth. Let's add a 1/2 inch to it. and we're good to go. So again, I can move on, I can export this model or send it to the mold maker, and I don't have to worry about going back and forth between CAD systems. Okay, so just a few questions that have popped up, bear with me. Is there a feature to create folders or labels to organize the uploaded files? And this is a very good question. We do not have the capability to create folders or labels as of yet. We do have a tab manager that was recently introduced that makes this process a bit simpler. So if you haven't used Onshape in a while, we have a tab manager that allows you to filter by parts and assemblies and other miscellaneous files. And it is an easy way to get through it, but we do not have a way to organize into folders or labels as of yet. All right, another question. Can you have multiple users working on the same assembly on different parts simultaneously? And the answer is absolutely. Real-time simultaneous collaboration, whether you're working on the same assembly, same part, or different parts and different pieces of the document. So it really doesn't matter. But again, the neat thing is live real-time collaboration, and everyone always is on the latest version. You're never worrying about who has what, who has the latest version, is it checked in? All those issues go away with Onshape. All right, so is cloud rendering possible where you use the performance of multiple computers to increase the speed of the render? It's important to point out we're a cloud-based application, and many of the apps in the App Store are cloud-based applications, so we can scale to match the performance that you need. And so unlike a traditional rendering system where I might install it on 5 different computers and try and run it all at once, we can run on very powerful hardware, and you could be rendering on a Chromebook because the resources are being used on the server. Are there any plans to add mate features similar to SolidWorks? Currently, the method to create mates is completely different than any other CAD software I have used. And it is a bit different. I think that if you take the time to get the hang of it, it is a faster approach. And oftentimes we can eliminate redundant mates. And the example I often give is, yes, you do need to get the feel for mate connectors, but once you do, mating a bolt to a hole, for example, is 1 mate instead of 2 or 3. Mating parts together can be done with a single mate instead of a combination of mates. So it is a bit of a different approach, but we've tried to take a bit of a higher level approach to mates to try and simplify the process. So what I'd say is, definitely try and get the hang of the mate connectors. We feel it's a big advantage. All right, so this is working with your vendors. As I mentioned before, it's very easy. You just simply click share and you browse. They can export. They can even do direct editing, all those things. Again, right from the browser. No downloads, no installs, none of that. So let's get into the next example. And the next example I have is using Onshape as a design review tool. So maybe you're using Onshape to share with the sales department, right? Maybe I need a prospect, for instance, or a customer to look at the model and make sure that it's okay. Or I think the more common scenario, what if I need my boss to approve the design and I need them to review it, maybe add comments, give me some feedback, and approve the design. And this is another example where oftentimes users are sending a series of emails back and forth with screenshots and attached files. And sometimes you simply don't share with your boss because they don't have the CAD system or they don't want to go through the energy of installing the CAD system. So using Onshape as a design review tool has a lot of capabilities. The first that I like to mention is what we call follow mode. So if I'm reviewing a design with my boss, I can look at their screen in real time and I can see exactly what they're referring to. So if they're trying to point out a hole, they're trying to point out a fillet, I can double click their icon and I'm looking at their screen in real time. I don't have to wait for them to send me an email back and forth. So there's not this delay. We get instant feedback. So follow mode allows you to see your vendor screen in real time, and comments allow us to communicate in real time. So if I'm trying to, ask the person, is this hole diameter right? Or is this fillet right? Again, I'm not sending screenshots. I'm not sending emails back and forth. We're doing this all within Onshape. So let's jump into this. Now, I've already shared this document with the machine shop, but now I'm ready to share it with my boss. I need to have this design reviewed. So I'll click share, and we'll share this with my boss. In this case, Darren, who's on the line with me. And so I'll share it with Darren. Now, as I mentioned before, we can share it and you can decide what kind of permissions that you want to give them. So I can give them can edit and share permission, the ability to edit and share the model. Simply edit. Can view, comment, copy, and export, a very useful permission for this example. And then can view, copy, and export, and can view. And the idea behind this is we want to give the user very granular control over their share permissions. We want you to give you the options to share with the amount of control that you're comfortable with. Now in my case, I trust Darren, so I'm going to say can edit and share, and I click share. Okay, so very easy to do, and again, they get real-time access. Instantly they get access to the model, and I'll see feedback when they jump into the document. So it's a neat way for me to collaborate. And again, notice I get the feedback. So you'll see Darren's jumped into the document. I see the D icon there indicating that he's there. And if I double click that D, the icon for his social cue, I'm now looking at his screen in real time. And the neat thing about this is he can point out issues. So he can rotate the model around. So, okay, this is the issue that I'm referring to. This is the pocket that wasn't deep enough, for example. And I'm not sending screenshots back and forth. This is not this big, long hassle to communicate what we're talking about. He can point to the exact face or the exact edge that he's having an issue with. And there's no translation issues here, right? It's very easy for me to understand. So that's follow mode. And again, you just simply double click their social cue in the top right corner. Now, another neat thing about follow mode is when you left click to get out of follow mode, you just left click anywhere in empty space, it leaves you in the same model orientation that you were looking at on, my case, Darren's screen just a moment ago. The neat thing about that is now I'm looking at the exact thing that he was looking at, and I can continue working, right? Because we've communicated, he's shown me that this pocket was the issue. Now I can move on. I can make a change to that pocket. And again, I'm not sending a lot of data back and forth via email. So that's follow mode. And the neat thing, again, seeing each other's screen in real time allows us to communicate very quickly. But there's another element of this, and that is comments and the ability to add comments to your document. And the neat thing about this is I can tag individual features. Okay, and so if I click on this comment, for example, I can see that Darren's already added a comment. And you can see he says, is this fillet translation or transition correct? And if you look real closely, you actually see a little comment icon. So you'll see a little visual cue on the model itself telling me this is the fillet that he's referring to. Again, I'm not marking up a screenshot with a big arrow and saying this is what I'm talking about. I can just see the icon here. And if I actually click on it, it will highlight the edge and it will take me to the same orientation that he created the comment in. So now I'm looking at the same model orientation, I'm seeing the comment, and it's very easy for me to say, no, that does not look right. All right. And so now we're communicating in real time in the document. I'm not sending emails back and forth or any of those tedious processes, and we can communicate live. And again, I'm tagging features. I can tag faces, features in the feature list, edges, and so on. So there's lots of different flexibility here in terms of your options in commenting. And again, the comment capability is really trying to drive home that design review process where, I've shared this with my boss. He needs to review the design. He doesn't have a CAD platform, right? He doesn't have anything installed. He clicks a link and he's there. Okay, so those are two things I wanted to point out in terms of design review. And I think they're big with sharing your models. Maybe it's a boss, like I mentioned here before. Maybe it's a customer and you want to get final approval on the design before you send it to the machine shop. All these ways or all these examples are great examples of using Onshape to work with and use for design reviews. So let's jump into the next example. Now, the next example that I have for you is simply using Onshape to increase access for those without CAD. And it's very similar to the last example. And the reason I bring this up is there are a lot of people who would have never thought to share their CAD model with this group or that group because CAD is very expensive. And traditionally, you have to spend thousands of dollars for someone else to even look at your model. And sometimes you have viewers and things like that, but it's not easy. And so sharing with sales, for example, has never been a simple task. They need to download and install things. They may need to purchase things just to look at my model. And that's oftentimes not worth it. So the reason I like to bring this up is, think of all those areas in your company where you don't traditionally share because it's just too cumbersome or too expensive. With Onshape, it's free. It runs on a mobile device. And so you can share with anyone, and it's very easy for them to access your data and from anywhere. So you really can increase accessibility for all those users out there that you would have never thought to share with originally. So the big thing here that I like to point out is think of all those areas: sales, the shop floor. Maybe I want to share drawings with the shop floor so that they don't have to walk around with paper prints all day. Or management. Maybe I want to share with management and have them review the design. Oftentimes they don't have a CAD tool, right? They don't want to spend money on a CAD tool or spend time installing a CAD tool. Onshape is a great fit. I can access my CAD data from anywhere, and I don't have to install anything. And the other piece that I like to point out about this is Onshape Mobile, because Onshape Mobile allows us to access all this data from anywhere. So let's jump into that. Now bear with me for just one moment, and I'd like to give you a quick overview of Onshape Mobile. So this is an iPad, and now you could be running an Android tablet, an Android phone, an iPhone, or an iPad like I am here. And again, it's accessibility from anywhere. I can launch the Onshape app, and you'll see the come along that we imported just a moment ago. I can jump into that document, and I can see the assembly, right? So I can jump in and pinch to zoom, single finger drag. I can even go in and do things like measure. So I can select an edge and call up a measurement, for example, right? So all kinds of neat things. And again, we're doing this all from a mobile device. Now, the thing I like to point out about our mobile app is it's not at all specific as a viewer. A lot of times when you're working with a CAD system, the mobile apps are viewers. And although it's a great use case for it, and especially in my scenario, it's important to keep in mind that it is also a full-blown CAD editing tool. Our mobile apps can not just view the model, but also create sketches, features, parts, and assemblies from your tablet or phone. So I can go in and hide individual features. I can hide the handle assembly, for example. I can even jump into individual parts within this and make changes to them. Okay, so again, the Onshape mobile app, the idea behind it is really just trying to increase accessibility. Think of all those areas in the company where you never would have thought to share just because of the traditional cumbersome nature of a traditional CAD application. Okay. So that's Onshape Mobile, and really the last example that I have for you here is, just increasing that accessibility. Think of all those areas where you would have never thought to share before. So that's really what I had planned for you today. I know we're just a bit early. There are a few things I want to point out. First off, if you're just getting started in Onshape, we really encourage you to try Onshape in your professional work and let us know what you think. We're really interested in hearing your feedback. In fact, there's a feedback tool built into Onshape. If you go to the Help menu, you'll see an option for feedback. And it's very easy for you to give us feedback. It doesn't take a lot of work on your part. And we really take feedback from the users seriously. So please try Onshape in your professional environment and let us know what you think. Also, invite others and share. I've shown you how easy it is to share a document. You don't have to have an Onshape account, so you can click share and share it with anyone, and even if they don't have an Onshape account. And we've tried to make that as simple as possible. No downloads, no installs. They click a link, and they're looking at the same model as you are. So invite others and share. And the last thing I want to mention is if you're interested in meeting local users or establishing a user group, we'd love to help. We'd love to help you set things up. Now, one last thing that I have for the audience out there, and that is a quick poll, so bear with me. If you would take just a moment to answer the questions here. Going forward, which webinar topics interest you the most? Which webinar topics are you most interested in? So please take a moment, answer the poll. We'd like to get some feedback from those in the audience so that we can plan future webinars. So I'm going to give you just a few seconds here to give us any feedback, and then we will move on. A quick question while we're filling out the poll. Are there any options to take a complete backup of all the files from Onshape just to make sure that I don't lose all my files from your server? It's important to point out you can download the models in neutral file formats, but Onshape itself is backed up several times over. You never have to worry about Onshape losing the data. We have several redundant locations for the data, and it's much more secure oftentimes than a backup on your local disk, for example, because it's replicated in different places. So in terms of accessibility and true redundancy in your backup, you will never have an issue with Onshape losing your data. But it's important to keep in mind all your Onshape designs can be exported as neutral formats. So step IGES parallel roll options as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. And I have one more poll for you, so bear with me. If there's anyone interested out there in the audience, would you like a sales engineer to contact you? We can have a sales engineer reach out to you and answer any questions that you have, or maybe, again, help with anything that you may be running into. So I'll give you just a moment. Please take a moment to fill out that poll, and then I will I'll finish things up. A question that's come up with SOLIDWORKS materials assigned, is there a way that these can be retained? The answer is no, not currently, but you can apply materials in Onshape itself. So if you're looking for things like the mass data, you can do that in Onshape. Okay, everyone, I think we have the polls answered, and that's really what I had planned. Again, I'm going to stick around and answer any questions that you have, so feel free to type them in. We're going to stick around for just a bit. But that's it, everyone. Thank you, and have a good day.